Hi everyone and welcome to this session. My name is Monika and I'm a behavioral psychologist working with cybersecurity. I have a double-edged background, one with Doctors Without Borders, working in wars, disasters and in boardrooms, and the other edge has been in helping organizations with transformation, leadership and behavior design. H&M Group is one of the biggest retailers in the world with several different brands, for example, Cos, Monkey, Weekday, apart from H&M. And at H&M Group, my job is to work with a psychological perspective on cybersecurity to help our 150,000 colleagues to stay safe in the digital world. So I'm the only orange boat in a harbor of cool black tech boats. The only psychologist in a 4,000 engineering squad at Business Tech in H&M Group. And sometimes I'll feel like the odd one out. Let me tell you a story about being the orange boat and why it is important. I was working for Doctors Without Borders in the first response to the Haiti earthquake in 2010. And there were thousands and thousands of injured patients and people suffering from loss and trauma. And one evening, I was really tired, sad and disillusioned. And I said to a certain friend of mine that I wish I was a surgeon like you so I could be more useful. And he put an arm around my shoulders and said, people need help for their bodies, but they also need to tell their story, to be listened to be understood and get help with that, so that they can go on being human. And his words have stayed with me, and that's why I'm doing this. The world has become a bit of a tech jungle, where many people feel lost and frustrated. So I'm working for people to be understood and technology to be adapted, so that people can move easily in a tech world and go on being human. So if you are an orange boat, keep it up. Your work is important. And today I'm going to talk about behavioral analysis and how that can be incredibly useful, especially when it comes to understanding why people do what they do and what we should measure. My focus will not be so much on the details of measurements, such as reliability, validity, statistics, and all that fun stuff, but rather on the right thing to measure. And the purpose of measuring? Well, to know where we are, where we have pain spots, and see if our interventions are working. So by the time we're done, you will have learned 4 rules of thumb to make it easier to know which behaviors to measure, 1 model for measurement and examples of how to do it. And the 4 rules are about check the long-term effect, positive consequences are the best, now wins over later, and context beats motivation. So, the more efficient you are at doing the wrong things, the wronger you become. It is much better to do the right thing wronger than the wrong thing righter. And if you do the right thing wrong and correct it, you get better. So think about this. If you do the wrong thing right, your result becomes wronger and your risk can increase. That's what happens when we measure the wrong things with great detail. For example, a while back, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity recommended, for example, to measure the amount of people who have completed the yearly security training as a measure of security culture. And if we do measure this, and if 99% have done the yearly security training, we create an illusion of a strong security culture. Since completing training in January doesn't influence our behavior that much in December, as other priorities have carried it out. the threat landscape is intensifying and adapting, and we who play defense have to cover a very wide field. And that's why we have to choose how to play. So the problem is that people do things for many reasons. Have you ever tried getting a 7-year-old to walk straight on a path through a park? That demands constant vigilance, which demands some kind of magic that I don't seem to possess. We never succeed in my family, zooming around the park like butterflies on speed. And even adults take shortcuts when they walk. It's a bit like herding cats, and quite a lot like our job, right? So firstly, behavior is complex. People don't walk where we plan them to. We are motivated by sweets, despite knowing that broccoli is better for us. And at the same time, we humans can also endure great difficulties to break the chains of injustice and fight for human rights, just like Gandhi. And many different factors influence us. Different factors influence different people differently and at different times in their lives. So humans forget things. We make mistakes, we get emotional, and we take shortcuts if our priority is needed, and we help others. And all this can be taken advantage of by social engineers. And that is human risk. That is the beauty of humanity, but it's also a challenge for us behavior designers when we work with human risk, meaning limiting risky behaviors and enhancing safety behaviors. And secondly, part of the problem is that measuring behavior is complex, as some of our starting signals and motivations are internal. And it can't all be calculated in meters with a tape measure, but it has to do with emotions, experience, how different contexts influence us and our backgrounds, and a lot of different other factors. So behavior analysis can make the right path a lot easier for us. And this is what hardcore behavior analysis for real looks like. I think that's enough to scare anyone. So don't worry, I'll give you a more user-friendly and easier version. Starting off with 4 rules that you can use to make sense of behaviors easier. How can we generate long-term behavior change? Emotions are temporary, and so is attention. Using emotions such as fun, hope, anger, or fear can work exceptionally well to kickstart a new habit. But we still have months or years of keeping that behavior up. So we need several different things, regulations, incentives, and nudges that facilitates the behavior, even when your motivation has died down. And here is how not to do it. Raise your hand if you know the piano stairs. In 2009, designers created the piano stairs at Odenplan subway station in Stockholm. And the idea was to make it fun and easy for commuters to walk up the stairs instead of taking the escalator. And it worked really well for a couple of days. Now, just imagine the noise on a Monday morning. You start to get a bit annoyed. The tourists and kids are playing on the stairs and disturbing your morning peace, and you would really prefer that they stopped. And by Friday morning, you hate the piano stairs, the racket they make and all the people playing on them, and so does every other regular traveller. And you all start to send clear signals to those thinking about using the stairs to think again or die. And it becomes common knowledge to everyone traveling, and who's not a tourist, that only an idiot will take the stairs. And ultimately, even those who prefer the stairs to begin with end up taking the escalator. So the stairs in Stockholm, Sweden, was up for about 2 weeks, and then they took it away. And this teaches us to check the long-term effect. That's our rule of thumb number 1. Ice cream beats broccoli. If we are free to choose, most people prefer ice cream to broccoli, and we want it now rather than later. It takes a mental effort to remember and to discipline yourself that I need to lose weight and therefore I should eat broccoli in order to reach my goal of Beachbody 2023. Especially if I'm hot, tired, and just outside an Italian ice cream parlor, giving me both internal and external prompts. So a positive experience now creates a stronger behavior than when we have to wait for the results, especially if there are negative consequences, such as enduring broccoli. So, talking about consequences, some of you might think of the learning potential of negative experience, such as getting your paycheck reduced or getting a reprimand by your manager. And negative experiences influence our behavior strongly, but it also has other negative effects, such as, for example, not talking about your mistakes or fear of retribution. And that is why we should be quite cautious about using that in order to develop security behaviors. So, check what consequences happen after a behavior. Is it positive? Is it negative? Does it happen now or later? Positive experiences win. They create stronger behaviors. And the consequence now influences behavior more than having one later. A yoga retreat is different to doing the taxes. When we are on a peaceful yoga retreat, where rooms, atmosphere, talk and food is all about health, it is much easier to stay calm, stick with the broccoli, and promise yourself to do yoga and broccoli every lunch hereafter. 3 months later, when it's time to do the taxes, documents are missing and you are stressed beyond belief, that same motivation can easily disappear. Context has changed, you get different starting signals, priorities have shifted, and environment has changed. So no matter how motivated you are, you need to have the surrounding environment to support your behavior. Context beats motivation. And these rules are true in cybersecurity too. You probably have examples of behaviors that are relevant to you, like information handling or reporting incidents. I'm going to pick one example that I'm going to use all through my presentation, and I do that in order for people to be able to follow it easily. But please pick one behavior that you are struggling with and apply as we go along. So let's have a look at behavior analysis. Part of the solution to the problem. It's been around in the 1940s. It's been used in schools, in therapy, psychiatry, management, and now also used in cybersecurity. So if we look at this image, behavior is influenced by starting signals and consequences. And starting signals can be anything from a McDonald's sign to signal you to eat, or a red light signaling you to stop your car. And starting signals are important. Without them, we don't know that we should stop behaving. But they only influence 20% of how strong our behavior becomes. Companies often work with starting signals, prompts, trainings, and awareness, and they miss sometimes looking at the consequences. Consequences for eating, for example, are feeling full and happy, which reinforces the behavior of eating very strongly. So what happens after the behavior influences 80% of how strong and consistent the behavior becomes. So let me take an example. Sending an email about reading the information security policy is a starting signal to read it, and companies often expect people's behavior to change afterwards. But the consequences when you open the document is that it's long, difficult to understand, and it entails you spending time doing complicated things, which takes time away from your work. That means a lot of negative consequences and no positive consequences for reading the document and then do what it says. So in this case, the starting signal has little effect as the negative consequences are too strong. So the starting signal is important, but consequences influence more. So another example of this is if you come into a dark room, the darkness and inability to see is the starting signal for your behavior to start searching for a light switch. And we do this behavior of searching for the light switch because it has really worked in the past and we really want to see as humans. And flipping the switch gives us light so that we can see, which is a very positive consequences. So from that, we can see that that behavior has much more natural and positive consequences than, for example, locking your computer when you stand up. Because there is no starting signal for locking your computer. And more importantly, there's no consequences after locking it, apart from the lock screen. So let's apply the rules of thumb of the piano stairs, ice cream beats broccoli in yoga retreats. That is, long-term effects, positive experiences win, now beats later, and context beats motivation to a problem that we all know. Let's apply it to a problem that we all know, just to make it easy for you to apply this model, the example of passwords. So if I get onto an online shopping site, I put things in the basket, it will ask me to log in if it's a new page, and I get a prompt to set a password. That is my starting signal. And what happens here from a psychological perspective is that this prompt triggers my associative memory, which reminds me of my past experiences of logging into websites, and if I have emotionally loaded experiences of similar situations, and in the best of worlds, it triggers my memory of previous trainings about passwords. Now, I know from experience that if I set a complex password, it is very likely that I will forget it. And I will have to go through the whole process of resetting it. So using the rules of thumb that we talked about earlier, if I set a complex password, we can see that I forget the password, I lose time due to the reset, and I most likely get annoyed about feeling forgetful and resetting. So these are negative and immediate consequences, which means that they have a strong influence on behavior and probably decrease the likelihood that I will set a complex password. And doing the right thing and avoiding getting hacked, or the rule of thumb, well, we learned it in training, so it's a starting signal, but most of us haven't experienced getting hacked. So it also is seen as a very uncertain consequence if it's ever going to happen. So therefore, it has quite a weak influence on behavior. Compare this to setting the easy password. That means that I can shop quickly and I can get what I want, which is to see all these wonderful things to buy. And the rule of thumb here is that it's positive and immediate consequences, which means that it has a strong influence on behavior. And most likely, you might say to yourself, well, no one I know has been hacked. And the rule of thumb there would be that your social context will influence your behavior. And if nobody you know have ever been hacked, well, then that is also part of what will influence how strong this behavior becomes. So I know what you're thinking. Just use a password manager. Well, so do I. But is it that easy? Let's analyze a password manager introduction. So let's test this using the rules that we've learned. We want users to experience that it's fast, works every time, and that they get a positive experience from it, so that they will use it long term and it becomes a habit in all situations, including the stress ones. So what consequences do you need to be mindful of when introducing a password manager? Well, you need to get over the threshold of entering usernames and passwords for the first time. It does take quite a long time and is most likely a negative consequence for people. And when you enter your passwords, you might realize how bad some of them are, and you need to change them. And there's a risk of people being overwhelmed by both having to enter their passwords and also to change them, because they know that it can be a time-consuming thing to do. Also, have a good look at how long does it take to log in with a password manager, because people are quite sensitive to delays, and if it takes too long, there's a risk that people will tire of waiting. And do people run into problems with it? This is a negative consequence. How often does that happen? And beware that these negative experiences not only affects the individual, but quite often turn into stories affecting larger groups. If they run into a problem, how fast can they get help if something doesn't work? What do you do if someone gets locked out of the password manager? How quickly can it be fixed for important stressed people? And lastly, of course, do people get a positive experience? Is it easy? Do they get the results they want? And is there any other encouragement for this? So where to start? Well, my suggestion for you to get answers to these questions is to create a test group of your specific target group. We ask people in the test group about consequences, why they do what they do, and what they think. So what can we do to move ahead? Well, look at behaviors in the actual situations, and preferably over a range of situations. Look at starting signals and consequences when people use the process and the technology. Are there good starting signals? Are there positive consequences close in time when people do the behavior? Do negative things happen? And are the wins far away? Context influences and often wins over our motivation. That's one of our rule of thumbs. And check if there are any vulnerable situations. For example, one behavior can work perfectly well under normal circumstances, but when there is stress, the behavior disappears. Now, this is very common. So check, for example, time periods when people are more stressed. And are there any competing behaviors that win over the desired behavior? So how can we do this? I developed this model and the measurements together with some researchers from Karolinska University in Sweden. It's still a developing model, but it's still a guidance and the key to learning and measuring. Start off by looking at your top risk within cybersecurity for your company. And when it comes to our area, it's mostly likely around social engineering, credentials, information handling. Identify key security behaviors or key risk behaviors and analyze the situations in which they occur. Measure these behaviors and factors that influence the behaviors that we know of from research. For example, stress or threat perception, the knowledge you have, or leadership encouragement. And then you work with increasing your behavior adoption and you follow up with your metrics and adapt your actions. So from our first analysis and around the measurements from here, I'd like to share an interesting finding. Leadership counts. Amazing, isn't it? Well, we found that leadership encouragement of cybersecurity activities is a key influencing factor for several security behaviors. So, logically, if we can get more leaders to encourage security behaviors, more people will actually do them more often. Therefore, we are testing how we can make this behavior to encourage security behaviors easier for leaders. So that's what we're doing right now. And what do you do with your measurements then? Well, you triangulate your data. That means combining different measurement instruments. It allows us to see if there are similar patterns so that we know if the instruments seem to measure the same phenomenon. For example, we see similar patterns in a survey and in our incident logs. So ideally, one should combine quantitative and qualitative measures. The methods we have used so far are logs from Microsoft Defender, phishing, focus groups, and survey data. So looking at our example of the password situation, what measures can we investigate? Well, surveys and focus groups, we can ask about how people use complex and unique passwords today. When do they bother? When do they not? What influences their behavior, stress, colleagues' attitudes and habits, leadership behaviors? What are their perception of this? And then we can compare that to logs. We can look at amount of resets of passwords, for example, over the year, quality of passwords data. And if you have done a proof of concept of a password manager, you can look at the data from there. The amount of active users and their activity levels, quality of passwords, breach passwords. And best of all, you can keep following the early adopters to understand their long-term behaviors and get an idea if it's increasing, if it's decreasing over time. And then you can ask them about in a survey or focus group, but why? So here are some tips in an example of a password manager deployment, right? What you can think about. So try to think in behaviors. And before you do that, you need to distinguish your different target groups. For example, the economy department is probably different to a tech team. What is this group like? How do they behave today? What do they know about passwords? How easy is this behavior for them? And how important is it to them? What do they need? And what is the specific behavior that you want them to do? Well, be specific about this. Well, in the first introductory phase, you want them to enter their passwords into a password manager. And after that, you want them to use this password manager continuously. And are there any competing behaviors here? Well, yes. Do nothing. Keep your old passwords. Works excellent. So that's what we're up against. Now, secondly, find the prompt. What is your prompt? Well, in the first phase, when you are introducing it, you probably send out an instruction email or an invite and an introduction session. Maybe you even have a cook-along session to overcome the threshold of entering your password. Then, in the continuous phase, well, it's the automatic password prompt pop-up, of course. And then, at what point in time should the trigger come? Well, in the first phase, it's probably a good idea to introduce it in the low season, when people in your target group have less stress. And when you're in the second phase and it's continuous work, it's whenever they get onto a login page, of course. And for an extra bonus, it's good if the prompt or the trigger can remind the user about why they should do the behavior, the why or the benefits. And for an economy department, it could be a simple thank you for keeping money and personal data of the company safe using this tool. And thirdly, look at the consequences. Do you have positive consequences? Oh, well, yes. A password manager autofills information faster than typing it yourself. You can share passwords easily and safely with colleagues. And they quite often offer a private use so that I can keep my family safe at home. Is there a nuisance that disappears? Yes. Having to fill out your credentials and change your passwords every so often, that disappears. That's a positive thing. And then you check the long-term consequences, of course. That was the rule of thumb we talked about before. And if the positive consequences and the nuisances that disappear are quite influential, and the behavior is easy enough, hopefully it turns into a habit. This is how a login is done, just like brushing your teeth. And of course, you measure your key indicators to see that the behavior continues to work over time. You can look at amount of active users, activity levels, quality of passwords, and number of support requests. So, here's your call to action. I think that we are still very much like these kids, investigating a new area with so many possibilities to develop. Yes, cybersecurity risk is increasing. Behavior is complex and measuring human risk can be tricky. But if we can learn from science and each other, we have a great shot at knowing where we are and what works. So here's your call to action. Go out there, investigate, and find the right behaviors to measure. So identify 3 key behaviors based on your top risk. Check the consequences, the long-term effects, the positive consequences, and that they happen now. Investigate how your context influences this behavior, and check over a variety of different situations. Check your starting signals, that you have good, strong starting signals that are very clear and easy to interpret. And if you do this, it gives you better insight into what you should measure and how your behavior design can be done. And most importantly, let's learn together. Best of luck, and looking forward to learning from you all. If you want to talk more to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you.